Hello and welcome to Pandora's Box. This is Kaleah, and today I'm going to talk to you about the 5 different types of narcissism. Now, a lot of people might be asking, 5? I thought there were only 2. I thought there was the cerebral and the somatic, or I thought there was the covert and the overt. Well, those are different types. Other people have defined these as different types of narcissism. But the types that I'm going to talk about come from Alexander Lowen's book, Narcissism, which I think is a really brilliant work on narcissistic personality disorder. And I've done a lot of research into narcissistic personality disorder. This is the work that makes the absolute most sense to me, and I have used his definitions and his work quite a lot. Why people want to know about the different types of narcissists or about narcissistic personality disorder in the first place? Well, the reason that most people want to know is twofold. One reason is that if you accept that the destructive person in your life is a narcissist, has a personality disorder, and is not likely going to change, perhaps you might be able to move on. Because a lot of people stay in these relationships holding on to hope, hoping that things will change, hoping that things will get better, but they're really quite abusive and chaotic and crazy making. So they end up staying and trying to fix or heal the situation. When you learn about narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder, you realize, this is going nowhere. It's not going to change. It's not going to get better. So researching and understanding narcissistic personality disorder is really helpful to help make that decision, to help get out of the relationship, and also to help put the responsibility in the right place. Now, don't get me wrong, we all have responsibility in every relationship. But the thing about being in a relationship with a narcissist is that a narcissist is going to project his shadow, what he or she is denying within the self, outward onto you, and accuse you and blame you of doing the very thing that he or she is doing. And that is a very crazy making. Over time, when this kind of dynamic happens over and over and over again, you may start to question yourself. You may start to doubt yourself. You may, your self-esteem may be eroded. It's not a good situation, which is why people are so messed up when they come out of these relationships. So understanding narcissistic disorder, or personality disorder, understanding that is very helpful in realizing, hey, there's a name for this. It's a disorder. It's crazy making. And that's what happened to me. So it really helps people to shed light on what's going on, so that they can break free and start getting the help that they need. It's really important to know that that narcissistic behavior is not your fault. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it, and you can't control it. That's also the 3 C's of codependency, but this really applies to the narcissist. There is nothing you can do to change that person, to get them to treat you with greater respect, to get them to love you more. There's absolutely nothing that you can do. So the best thing to do, as you probably have already found out, is to walk away, to get away from that personality. It's not your fault. You can't change it. So work on yourself. Start getting back to yourself and the self-love that is going to build you back up to a much better and healthier place. You are responsible if you choose to stay in this relationship. So once you realize what you're dealing with, you can go into denial about it, and you can convince yourself that this is not really happening, that this person is really normal, so to speak. but you're really only hurting yourself. So you need to take the responsibility to make a change in your own life. So the cluster B personality disorders, I want to talk about them for a moment. All cluster B personality disorders are disorders of narcissism. Psychology's broken these different types of narcissistic personalities into categories. So there's categories. There's what is called narcissistic personality disorder. There's histrionic personality disorder. There is borderline personality disorder. There's antisocial, and there's paranoid personality disorder. So these are all disorders of narcissism. And the late Alexander Lowen includes all the cluster B personality disorders under one roof that he calls narcissistic personality disorder. Now keep in mind, he was practicing a long time ago, before a lot of us were ever born. His book Narcissism was written in 1988. It was, the first pressing was in 1988. So, he's been practicing for a long time. And here's what Alexander Lowen says. He says, narcissism describes both a psychological and a cultural condition. On the individual level, it denotes a personality disturbance characterized by an exaggerated investment in one's image at the expense of the self. Narcissists are more concerned with how they appear than what they feel. Indeed, they deny feeling that contradict the image that they seek. Acting without feeling, they tend to be seductive and manipulative. Striving for power and control, they are egotists, focused on their own interest, but lacking the true values of the self, namely self-expression, self-possession, dignity, and integrity. Narcissists lack a sense of self derived from body feelings. Without a solid sense of self, they experience life as empty and meaningless, and it's a very desolate state. Lowen tells us that in his earlier days of practicing psychology, most of the people that were coming in for treatment were neurotic. Their symptoms were what would fall under the category of neurosis. They'd come in with crippling anxiety, guilt, phobia, and obsession. But over time, he stopped seeing so much of the neurotic symptoms coming in and more of the narcissistic symptoms. The lack of feeling, depression, inner emptiness, frustration, and lack of fulfillment. He said that many were quite successful in their work, which suggested a split between the way they performed in the world and what goes on inside. Lowen said that what seems rather strange is a relative lack of anxiety and guilt despite the severity of the disturbance. Their performance socially, sexually, and in the world seemed too efficient, too mechanical, too perfect to be human. They functioned more like machines than people. Alexander Lowen talks about the culture of narcissism, which I think is really important, and I'd like to talk a lot more about that in the future. How it has grown in the 40 years that he was practicing at the time that he wrote the book in 1985. He'd been practicing psychology for 40 years. And he has known that narcissism was growing and becoming more prevalent. More and more people were coming in with disorders of narcissism. And as from 1985, it has grown even more, gigantic proportions. It has become an epidemic in our society. We have a very narcissistic society. So it's become somewhat normalized in so many ways to focus on the external, to focus more on things, how things appear than how things really are. And you see this in social media with the bright, shiny profiles and the look at me and look at how great my life is, when inside behind closed doors, that very person might be falling apart and struggling with depression and mental illness and all kinds of other things. They don't want the world to see that side of them, so they show the shiny side and hide their true self, what's really going on. There's a lot of shame around being who we are and having imperfections and having feelings even. It's the feelings that are being amputated from our society, where it's become somewhat taboo to have feelings. And that's really a shame. Lowen says that the basic disturbance in the narcissistic personality is the denial of feeling. So let's talk about his 5 categories of narcissism. He goes on to say that there are various degrees of disturbance or loss of self in the narcissistic personality. He broke narcissistic personality disorder into 5 categories, ranging in the severity of disturbance. He tells us the degree in which a person identifies with his or her feelings is inversely proportional to the degree of narcissism. So there is a correlation between the denial or lack of feeling and the lack of a sense of self. Grandiosity refers to the unrealistic sense of superiority, a sustained view of oneself as better than others that causes the narcissist to view others with disdain and as inferior. There's also an exaggerated belief in one's uniqueness or specialness. Grandiosity is a characteristic of narcissistic personality disorder that Lowen uses to measure the degree of narcissism in an individual. Lowen uses the example that if a person's self-image is of one who is attractive and appealing to the opposite sex, and that person actually is, then that's not grandiosity. Grandiosity is a fantasy life that really doesn't have anything to do with reality. Grandiosity is used in describing narcissistic disturbances as directly related to the fantasies one has that has no basis in reality. So as he begins to describe the 5 different types of narcissism, he is looking at the degree of grandiosity with each narcissistic personality type. Now, I might add before we get started that this doesn't have anything to do with the damage that narcissists do to others. Grandiosity, the amount of grandiosity may not be equal to the amount of damage that is done. Even the mildest forms of narcissism can do a lot of damage to people that are involved with that narcissist. So just keep that in mind. So we're going to start with the first category of narcissism that Alexander Lowen talks about, and that is the Phallic narcissist. And this is the least pathological form of narcissism and is present in men whose egos are invested in the seduction of women. There is an inflation and a preoccupation with their sexual image. This personality type is self-confident, often arrogant, elastic, vigorous, and often impressive. The narcissism is manifested as an exaggerated display of self-confidence, dignity, and superiority. This type of narcissist often shows strong attachments to people and to things, even if their relationship to a loved person is more narcissistic than object libidinal. The phallic narcissistic character may show up as the player, the womanizer, the cheating spouse, and even the sex addict, and also the man with the wandering eye. Now you might ask, what about the female version of the phallic narcissistic character? Well, he did approach that under the same category, but he calls the female version the hysterical character type. So the female version of the phallic narcissistic character is the hysterical character type. Now it's really interesting how the word hysterical is used. It would probably match up with the histrionic personality disorder in the DSM. But there's two different definitions that we're talking about here. The word histrionic means dramatic and theatrical. And although that might be true, what Alexander talks about is that the term hysteria comes from the Greek word hystera, or womb, which denotes strong identification with female sexuality. So there's more focus on that identification with female sexuality than there is on being dramatic and theatrical, although those characteristics may be there as well. This personality type is not given to overt displays of hysteria like one might think in listening to that word and hearing the word histrionic. You might think that they're hysterical, that they're very verbally hysterical. But it's more that she, like the phallic narcissistic male, is preoccupied with her sexual image. She too is self-confident, often arrogant, vigorous, and impressive. The narcissism comes out in a tendency to be seductive and to measure her value by her sexual appeal based on her feminine charms. Okay, we're heading this way a lot in our society now. Keep in mind, we're talking, this book was written in 1985. We've taken gigantic leaps since 1985 in how our culture is showing up, and that narcissism amongst men and women is huge. Just go to Facebook, just go to social media. It's quite huge. And a lot of women are using their sexuality to get attention, to get admiration, to get their needs met, basically, for feeling superior. The second type of narcissism is called the narcissistic character. Narcissistic characters have a more grandiose ego image than the phallic narcissist. So they are not just better, they are the best. They are not just attractive, they are the most attractive. They have a need to be perfect and to be seen as perfect by others. Do you know anybody like that? I have. In many cases, narcissistic characters may display numerous achievements and seeming success. So they can look very successful and be successful as they show an ability to get along in the world of money and power. They may think too highly of themselves, but others think highly of them too. So they're getting their ego stroked on a regular basis from the admiration of other people that admire them for their worldly success. We place in our culture an awful lot of importance on that outward successful appearance. So, you have a successful narcissistic man that is a narcissistic character like what I'm talking about. There's a lot of women that are going to throw themselves at their feet because they are in awe of their power, of their brilliance, of what they've accomplished in the world. So we really reward these types of personalities. Their image is grandiose. It is contradicted by the reality of the self. Narcissistic characters are completely out of place in the world of feeling, and they don't know how to relate to others in a real and human way. Many of you, I'm sure, have experienced that too, that you can't really relate to somebody like this on any kind of emotional level. They just don't want to go there. They're terrified to go there. They're shut down in that way. So that's really important to know. If you see this showing up in somebody in your life, there's a really good chance this is what you're dealing with. There's a difference between the phallic narcissist and the narcissistic character that I would like to talk about. Lowen tells us that the way to look at the difference between the phallic narcissistic character and the narcissistic character is through their fantasies. In walking down the street, the phallic narcissist might imagine that women are looking at them with admiration and men are looking at them with envy. Whereas the narcissistic character may imagine that people are stepping aside for him, that he's parting the Red Sea, that the red carpet is rolled out for him to make his appearance, to walk through his crowds of admirers. So he's got that kind of grandiosity in which he feels or she feels that people are just in awe of them. So that's a real interesting way to tell the difference between the two characters. Some narcissistic characters, despite their facade of self-assurance and command, are troubled by a sense of inadequacy. So way down deep under it all, there is an underlying sense of inadequacy. Okay, so the next one, number 3, the borderline personality disorder. The borderline may or may not overtly show typical symptoms of narcissism. However, I think it's really important to talk about the borderline here because the borderline, like many of these personality types that I'm talking about, is in a completely different category. And so people don't think of the borderline as a narcissistic personality, and they get confused about, okay, what is she? Is she a borderline or is she a narcissist? Well, both. And that's what you need to understand, that a borderline personality is a type of narcissistic personality. Some borderline personalities project an image of success, competence, and command in the world, which is supported by their achievement in the world of business or entertainment. So they have something to back up their fantasies. In contrast with the front of narcissistic characters, this facade readily crumbles under emotional stress, and the person reveals the helpless and frightened child within. So once again, very different from the narcissistic character, in that narcissistic character has sufficient ego strength to hold up his fantasies about who he is, where the borderline is more likely to crumble under pressure and show her fragile inner self that she doesn't really want to look at. And often the stories that I hear from people that come to me is that there can be these windows of crumbling, but then that ego goes right back up, that those ego boundaries go back up, and they may actually have forgotten completely about their crash or their crumbling. And they don't mention it, they don't want to talk about it, it didn't happen. And it's oftentimes at these points of crumbling where they seek help or where they want to seek help. So, it's hard to say how long something like this will last when their ego doesn't hold up and they crash. It can be hours, it can be days. It's really hard to say. It depends on the individual. But one thing you can be sure of is when the ego goes back up, all is forgotten and they're back to their grandiose self. They present themselves as deprived, emphasizing their vulnerability, and they're often clingy. In these cases, the underlying grandiosity and arrogance are hidden because they can't be supported by proven accomplishments. So they don't have the track record out in the world to prove their grandiosity, as we were saying before. With the narcissistic characters, their egos are so strong in holding up their idealized image of superiority that they are padded against depression, where a borderline will experience depression and often seek treatment for depression or other underlying issues that they're having. They may hold similar grandiose fantasies, but these fantasies are not backed by the ego strength found in the narcissistic character, just like what I said before. They may not have the necessary aggression to achieve the success they believe that they are deserving of. The borderline may feel she is better than others, special and deserving of special treatment. Although borderlines can be just as grandiose as the narcissistic character, their grandiosity is less evident. The narcissistic character self-image is grandiose in its less direct conflict with reality because it's never been smashed down. It's never been questioned. But borderlines, on the other hand, find themselves caught between two conflicting views. They're either totally great or totally worthless because they've been smashed down quite a bit in their life. So they kind of go back and forth between the feeling superior and feeling inferior, feeling great, feeling worthless. And these two opposing beliefs about themselves are projected onto others in what is known as the all good, all bad splitting. The grandiose fantasies of a borderline become even more necessary to pull them from painful feelings of worthlessness. So they erect these fantasies just to kind of pull them out of these feelings like they're just worthless, that they don't have any value. Say, the fourth one. The fourth type of narcissistic personality disorder is the psychopathic personality. Now, once again, this is an old term, the psychopathic personality. However, it's used quite a bit today. It's also called the sociopath and the antisocial personality. All psychopathic personalities consider themselves superior to other people and show a degree of arrogance and contempt for common humanity. Like other narcissists, they deny their feelings. There is a tendency to act out, often in antisocial ways. They will lie, cheat, steal, and even kill without a sense of guilt or remorse. The extreme lack of human feeling makes this type of personality very difficult to treat. Now, we have heard that all forms of narcissistic personality are very difficult to treat. But remember, Alexander Lowen did treat narcissistic personality disorder successfully. He had some very unique techniques that are not taught in colleges and universities today, having to do with working with the physical body and the emotions, and mental processing, like what happens in therapy. But he worked a lot with the physical body too, recognizing that the emotions are stored in the body, so that if he can work to unleash the motions in the physical body, that he could have more success. Now, he called this process bioenergetics. And when I went online to look up bioenergetics, it was really interesting that it isn't that common. It's not like there's tons of practitioners in bioenergetics. And here is why. Now, I don't know too much about the school in which bioenergetics is being taught and how much Alexander Lowen was actually involved in this school, but the course is like a 6-year course, and the price for the course is through the roof. So when you look at that, I don't think a lot of people are going to be inspired to go that route of learning. Especially if you have to have a master's degree in psychology first before you sign up for that. That's an additional 6 years of school and a whole lot of money. So, his technique is simply not being taught in a big way, which is a shame. But it gives you a clue into the healing. It's not just a process of having somebody come in and sit on the couch and start talking about what's going on. Because most of these narcissistic people have no clue what's going on emotionally. Remember, it's denial of feeling. They've cut off from their feelings. They don't have access to their feelings. So it takes a great work to get somebody like that in touch with their feelings. Now, also, it's important to mention that since we're on the subject of therapy, that the people who did come in to see Alexander came in of their own accord. They didn't have a significant other bringing them in. It was dissatisfaction in their own life that led them in, and that's really key to heal anything, is that you have to have the desire. You have to have enough desire to make a change in your own life. Otherwise, you're not going to do it. So for those of you that are going, oh, it can be healed, I'm going to get him in. No, don't waste your time. That person has to really want to change. And that's not likely if he's getting a lot of ego food out there in the world. So just remember that. Back to the psychopathic personality. Okay, so the term acting out describes an impulsive type of behavior that ignores the feelings of other people and is generally destructive, even to the best interest of the self. Lowen says that the impulses underlying this behavior stem from experiences in early childhood that were so traumatic and overwhelming that they could not be integrated into the developing ego. As a result, the feelings associated with these impulses are beyond the ego's perception. The action is therefore taken without any conscious feeling. So that means without a conscience. Murder in cold blood is an extreme example of acting out. Acting out is also common in narcissistic characters and borderlines, but not to the same degree as a psychopathic narcissist. The acting out of a psychopath is usually antisocial and longer in duration. And I've heard some stories about real long-term abuse that comes with stalking and tearing someone down, that they have a difficulty getting away because that sociopath is enjoying the hunt and the kill so much that they keep tracking this person down and causing great havoc in their lives. It's really a horrific situation to be involved with somebody like this. There's a quote by Alan Harrington, who did a study of psychopathic personalities, and he described successful psychopaths as brilliant, remorseless people with icy intelligence, incapable of love or guilt, with aggressive designs on the rest of the world. Wow. Many psychopaths achieve high positions in society as politicians, yeah, executives, lawyers, and even heads of churches. Their lack of feeling makes them ruthless leaders who care nothing for the people that they are leading. Psychopathic personalities are often seen as monsters of society. They're the serial rapists and murderers and the government leaders who commit genocide that fall into this category, just to name a few of the really top-notch psychopaths. The humanness in the psychopath has been completely amputated from the personality, and they're more monster than human. Of course, not all psychopaths show worldly success. The prisons are filled with people that have been diagnosed with antisocial personality. They tend to use their brilliance, because often these personalities are brilliant even if they aren't successful. They use their brilliance for criminal behavior. Okay, the fifth and final of the narcissistic personalities are the paranoid personality. So Lowen places the paranoid personality as the most severe because it is the furthest from health, showing clear-cut megalomania. Now, megalomania is the delusion about one's own power and importance. A paranoid personality person may believe that people are looking at them, talking about them, and even conspiring against them because they are special and very, very important. They may believe that they have special powers, and when they are unable to establish fantasy from fact, their insanity becomes apparent. In this case, there is full-fledged paranoia. Even with such extreme cases, Lowen says that all characteristics of narcissism are present, including extreme grandiosity, a marked discrepancy between the ego image and the actual self, arrogance, insensitivity to others, denial, and projection. The paranoid personality is more likely to be diagnosed as mentally ill or psychotic. Now, the borderline personality actually gets its name because initially it was considered to be on the borderline between neurosis and psychosis. So the borderline can actually be very close to going into full-fledged psychosis and may even do so. But and the psychosis, by the way, is just a break from reality, from what we call consensus reality, which is the reality that we all agree on, such as, you know, if you're not colorblind, okay, that's a white shirt over there, or that's a black pole, or a red flower, or, you know, we all have basic consensus ideas of what's going on in the world. Who's president? Is the sun shining in your area? Is it raining? You know, just the basic stuff. So with psychosis, there is a break from reality, and one sees reality completely different than what it really is. Paranoid personality has crossed that line into full-blown psychosis. So you may see a lot of paranoid personalities claiming that they are Jesus, or they're the reincarnation of someone really important, or, you know, they really identify with importance, and they seem to really believe it. So another thing I want to say about paranoid personality that I find really interesting is that they can hide in certain sectors in our society, such as the New Age. Now, I have a lot of New Age beliefs, so I'm certainly not knocking the New Age, but because I have a lot of New Age beliefs, I've seen a lot in this field. And it's really interesting how I've actually seen some of these personalities that the paranoid personalities that have really elaborate stories about how they are the chosen one. They've been chosen by, you know, some alien civilization, to save the world, to do some special duty, or, there's just something going on there. And, you kind of wonder sometimes when you understand this type of personality, what is real and what isn't. People that have gone on spaceships, did they really go on spaceships, or are they just psychotic? So sometimes it's really hard to know what's going on. So I just say that as a measure of, don't be really gullible, check things out. And I mean, there could be people on YouTube with millions of followers that are simply paranoid personalities that are getting a real charge out of having all these people believing what they're talking about. They believe what they're talking about too. I've had paranoid personalities come to me for counseling, and it's taken me a while to figure out what was going on, because they come under the guise that they're victims of narcissistic abuse. So we start there, of course, and I start asking them what's going on, and they start talking about this narcissist in their life. And sometimes that narcissist, they've never had any kind of relationship with that person. They might have met them, they might be their doctor, their lawyer, or something. So they've met somebody, they've fixated on that person, and they've created a fantasy about that person. And they might believe that that person is following them, is putting trackers in their car, that they've hired people to move in across the street to watch them, to take photographs of them, and at some point I start to realize what's going on, and it's a real fragile situation. Now I'm not experienced in working with something like this. I won't work with something like this once I realize what it is. But I don't have to tell people, I'm sorry, I can't work with you, because all I have to do is start to question the fantasy, and they go away. They never come back. They might hang up the phone before the session's over, and I never hear from them again. Or they will go through the rest of the session and I never hear from them again. They'll cancel their appointments or whatever, because they really aren't there for help anyway. They're really there because they want that attention for their fantasies. They want somebody to buy into their fantasies. So this is a really, really crazy disorder. And you may have discovered this in your own experience with narcissist. Those are the 5 different types of narcissistic personality disorder. Very interesting. Now, Alexander Lowen says that there's a lot of crossover, that he can't always make a diagnosis very easily. It may take a time working with somebody before he can make a diagnosis. And like all disorders, you can have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It might not be all clear, but hopefully this gives you a little bit more information to understand what might be going on with people in your life, to understand that all of this is narcissism, not just what we call narcissistic personality disorder. There's even some people out there, like a woman that I worked with that said borderlines are really what most people are talking about when they're talking about narcissistic personality disorder. But I think this sheds more light that there are so many types of narcissism that you just really have to use your best judgment, and it's not so important that you just need to know that something isn't right, and you need to know about the world of narcissism and the different personality types that fit into that category, just to protect yourself from these narcissistic people that do so much damage without giving a crap about what they're doing to other people. I had somebody post on one of my videos basically trying to get me to stop talking about narcissism. Stop it! Don't do that. Get the stick out of your own eye before you start casting stones at others or whatever, And the thing is that person was on my page for a reason. Yeah, could have been a troll, but narcissists don't want you to know about them because they can't operate unless they're in the shadows. They can't operate when people know what's going on. It's the knowledge, being armed with the knowledge and the awareness that helps us to make healthy choices for ourselves. And that's why I do what I do, to help people to make healthy choices. Of course, my focus is more on the healing. I don't talk a lot anymore about narcissism. I just reread Alexander's book and I just felt like I had to talk about these 5 different types. I felt it was really important. But my focus is usually on the healing, on our self-healing, on self-love, on reconnecting with our feelings, because for people who are coming out of narcissistic relationships or relationships with people that are narcissistic, they're a mess and very disconnected themselves to reality because of what they've been subjected to through gaslighting and projection and abuse of all sorts, that they're pretty messed up by the time that they come in. And the path to healing from narcissistic abuse that I use is through reconnecting with your feeling self. I call my other website is The Path Back to Self, because we have to connect to our feeling self. We have to get back in touch with that. And let's face it, you didn't succeed at being a robot, and congratulations for that, because it takes a robot to be with somebody like that, because in a sense, they're robots in a lot of ways. So you can be very grateful that you're not a robot. Stop trying to fit into robotic society. Instead, be part of the living, feeling, emotional, human society. And the more of us that can reclaim who we are, reclaim our feeling selves, and be a part of feeling society, the society that is truly alive and that uses our feelings to navigate through life. Instead of doing what we think people want us to do, we do what we feel to do. Instead of trying to get approval from the outside world, we walk in integrity and do what feels good for us. And so we have to really be in touch with ourselves and practice self-love, which is really important coming out of a relationship like that. So we need to reward openness and expression of one's true feelings instead of rewarding the tough guy who acts without feeling. We need to know where to place our value. If we place our value on how things appear rather than how things really are, we're only fooling ourselves. Things are not as they appear. Most of you know this through your own experiences. So let's open our eyes and look deeper into the truth. This begins with looking deeply into our own inner selves and reconnecting with the authenticity of our own being. Only then are we able to live in a world that is truly narcissism free. Thank you for listening. And if you found this video helpful today, it would be helpful for me if you would give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so that you can be the first to get the new audios and videos that I put out. You can find out more about my work at narcissismfree.com and pathbacktoself.com. Once again, thank you for listening and have a beautiful day.